And we are live. Welcome, folks, to episode 3279 of the Survival Podcast. I will have Ron Whitehurst coming on in just a moment. If you're like, that name sounds familiar, if you've been around a while, you may have heard from him before. I had him on the show a couple, 3 years ago, something like that. Really interesting guy. We're going to talk about biological methods of pest control and getting off the toxic pesticide cocktail. And as I always say, it's kind of a poison pill that once you go anywhere with it, you go with the pesticides, you end up with the herbicides. You go with herbicides, you end up with the pesticides. It's the side cocktail, and we don't want that. And so we're going to be talking to Ron just in a minute about the work he does there, how he helps people get off that biocide cocktail, and the work that he's been doing to change things for the better, even with conventional ag, to try to explain to these people the damage they're doing is not necessary in order to reap a good profit and a good yield of the crop. We'll have Ron on in just a minute. Before we do, let's go ahead and hear from our two sponsors of the day. Sponsor today, number one today, John Pugliano with the Wealth Steading Podcast. I met John Pugliano back in 2011 in Salt Lake City, Utah at a prepper convention. And we just had a really brief initial introduction. We started talking a little bit more. He started talking about doing a podcast. I told him to just do it. And we became really good friends. He became part of my expert council, a recurring guest on the show as well, and eventually a sponsor to the show as well. You should definitely check out the Wealth Steading Podcast, where you can learn to grow your wealth like you'd grow a garden. Most latest edition he has is called Understanding the Business Cycle. This is really important to know about right now. His podcasts are not very long. They're 10 to 20 minutes at the longest. Also, he is on Fountain FM, so consider getting over to Fountain to listen to John, and that way you can send him some value for value love in the form of Satoshis. Because every time he gets a sat, I giggle because he fought me tooth and nail not to get on V for V because he didn't think anybody would do it. And now he's rolling some Satoshis. Next up today, knifekits.com. You talk about a long-term sponsor. I'm not sure there's anybody that's still a sponsor that's been around as long as Knife Kits for the show. They first sponsored the show. I do know this. It was very early in 2010. 13 years we've had knifekits.com as a sponsor. They make building knives so easy. Anybody, even I, can do it. They've got all kinds of cool stuff. If you've never checked them out, you should realize they have stuff for like making sheaths and holsters and stuff from Kydex as well. They have some really cool raw materials for handles. I've got, for the people on the video, I've got some of them up on the screen right now. They even have like mammoth tusk. You can actually get fossilized mammoth tusk to make knives with. Buffalo horn, all kinds of cool stuff. You can make folders, fixed blades, and it really is easy to learn how to do. Of course, your first one's never as good as your last one, but I'll tell you what, it is definitely a cool hobby to get involved with. Check it out today, knifekits.com. With that, I'm going to bring our special guest, Ron Whitehurst, on screen in just a second here. There we go. And I caught you right in the middle of a cough, man. I tried to give you the time, and yeah, anyway, Ron, welcome back to the Survival Podcast.
Well, I appreciate being here. I appreciate what you're doing. Been listening to about 6-7 years now, and appreciate all the information that you do bring to our community.
Well, thank you for that very much. Like I said, I'm glad to have you back on again. When I saw your app come through, I'm like, I know that name. Mm-hmm. And so I looked you up on the side. I'm like, yeah, I remember that guy, the Bug Farm guy.
Yeah.
Just for people that are listening to the live audio or the live video, if you guys want to ask questions or get us to talk about certain things, please, the first couple words in your live stream comment, use all caps. I'll star that so Ron and I can come back to you toward the end of the show in a Q&A period. That'll make things easier. And since I'm multitasking, that'll help me do a good job for you. With that, Ron, I want to start off before we dig into the main topic. Like, what is your professional background? How did you get into, biological pest controls? How did you get into agriculture in the first place? Like, take us back to you're probably a while ago like me, but you're spacing out in school and trying to figure out what to do with your life. And how do you end up on this path?
Well, originally I was heading towards doing molecular biology, exploring life on the molecular level, and finished up school with biology and chemistry background, a lot of math, ready to charge into research. But that was 76, and there was a recession going on. All the labs were, laying off people, let alone, hiring anybody. And so I started following my next love, which is organic gardening, and developing myself as a consultant for organic farmers. That with my strong science background, I figured, okay, I could cut through a lot of the nonsense and see, what's really good, what's really necessary. And so started that in Indianapolis, where I grew up, and then moved with my first wife out to Silicon Valley to pursue her career in computer programming. And so wound up there, and when they were cutting down the apricot trees and producing apples, the computers, and started checking out the situation. I got a license to advise farmers on pest control, a pest control advisor license with the state of California. They require that if you're going to advise farmers, you need to, have this particular license. And had to study all these stupid chemicals I knew I was not going to use and never going to recommend to, the farmers I consulted with. But I got my certificate, my license, and started going to these meetings. And one of the both meetings, they were talking about, okay, you see this bug, use this chemical pesticide in the conventional meetings, and then in the organic farm meetings, use this organic pesticide. But there was one guy at both meetings who was talking about, okay, you see this bug, coming into your field. It's probably migrating in from the chaparral drying up, and all you need to do is plant a row of flowering plants along that edge of the field and host the beneficial insects, so that when these pests are migrating in, they'll be welcomed out to dinner, by the predators and parasites and such. Of course, the pests are on the menu. And I thought, that's the technology I want to learn how to use. And so been doing that since 1980. And so my wife and I run Rincon-Vitova Insectaries, a commercial bug farm. We grow the good bugs that eat the bad bugs and help farmers transition from chemically based control to working with biology, working with nature. And so we think that's important. And then we have a nonprofit institute, the Dietrich Institute for Applied Insect Ecology, through which we do training on how to build diversity on your farm to host the beneficial insects will help you manage the pest. So I'm a pest control advisor, permaculture designer, agroecologist, food web enthusiast, bug farmer, entomologist, pesticide activist, climate activist, food forest fanatic, and promoter of those small water cycles.
Very cool, man. So, you mentioned going to these meetings and learning about all these chemicals so you could get the certification so you could turn around and not recommend the chemicals. Like, you've kind of gone right at the throat of the beast here. And you spent like 18 months talking to people that you would really refer to as adversaries to try to come to agreement on reducing pesticides. What I've seen mostly out of, let's say, our side of this, I hate using us and them, but only way to explain it, our side of this is most people that take an organic, biological, permaculture, non-chemical approach to this, we just kind of go do it. And we give up on the system and just understand it as an unsustainable, collapsing system. So we better go do something. But you're trying to work with that side and bring more of them at least closer, if not closer to the fence, if not over it. What made you take that approach, and what was it like?
Yeah, indeed. What phrase strikes fear in the heart of independent-minded Americans? I'm from the government, and I'm here to help you. I worked on a government panel, but the recommendations we made were to correct a wrong begun a couple of generations ago. Historically, the university and the extension function as marketing arms of the pesticide and fertilizer industry. Robert Vanden Bosch, an entomologist with University of California, details this in his this collusion in The Pesticide Conspiracy, a book that was published in 1978. Unfortunately, the situation has not improved, and GMOs have been added along with the pesticides is something that the state is promoting. So once you use synthetic fertilizers, the plants are not healthy, and then you need to use the pesticides to kill the insect pests or keep them in check. Pests are Mother Nature's way of getting rid of sick and diseased plants. And so, the basic principle of organic is that a healthy plant resists pests and disease. And so the problem is not that we have got pests, the problem is that we don't have healthy plants. And so the mission of Rincon-Vitova is to promote biological control by natural enemies. And personally, for 25 years and 70 years as a company, we've helped farmers do this transition off of the toxic pesticides by setting up biological control systems. And so we know from experience, on a day-to-day basis, that we don't need any of this toxic shit, and we don't need those stinking synthetic fertilizers to grow our food, fiber, and medicine. And then thinking about it, the experience of our great-great-grandparents and then millennia of indigenous farmers that around the planet, that we've been growing food for thousands of years without using these toxic pesticides. And so not much has changed, in the last 100 years. And so we can certainly go back and learn, from our great grandparents and from indigenous knowledge that people have been collecting, in the context of agroecology and permaculture, how to return to this, growing food in harmony with nature. It's only been since 1950 that we've used significant amounts of toxic pesticides and chemical fertilizers in agriculture. So during World War II, the chemical companies, had this tremendous influx of funds to produce stuff for the war effort. And so they produced huge amounts of nitrate for the nitrate explosives. And so we converted that into nitrate fertilizers, and it worked great. You could get take this little bag of ammonium nitrate, of potassium nitrate, and scatter it around instead of taking a whole cartload of horse shit or cow shit, out to your field and spreading it around. So it was easier, but destroyed the structure of the soil. And then the nerve gas, the phosgene gas, and that sort of thing, they changed that into the organophosphate pesticides, which destroy people's nerves and give them cancer and little side effects like that we'd rather not have. So in the context of this work group with the state, they developed this language about sustainable pest management, or SPM, which is IPM plus, integrated pest management, plus consideration for the people involved in growing the food and the farm workers and the neighbors of the farmers. And then economic considerations. So it's not technically organic, but organic practices fit in underneath the label or the rubric of the SPM. So when I say SPM, you can think organic.
Yeah. It's interesting you bring this up. Yesterday I was talking about natural forms of fertility, and one of them being a plant called azolla, very high in nitrogen. It's been used as fertilizer around the world forever. It's been used in rice paddy systems in China going back thousands of years, probably because it showed up and they couldn't get rid of it anyway, and it worked. But what I brought up with that is like these biologically available sources of nitrogen, the plants can get at that nitrogen. And what you're talking about when they started dumping like ammonium nitrate, et cetera, on these fields back right after the war, the statistic that I found was that about 80% of that nitrogen would end up in the plant. And today, about 15 to 17% of that nitrogen actually is able to get into the plant. So we're dumping tons more of this stuff to get the same net amount into the plant, which means all the rest of it is ending up eventually in our water systems. And it's not like the molecule changed. It's the molecules and the life in the soil has been eradicated. And so that nitrogen is either the plant can only take so much of it in without assistance from other life forms, and the rest of it is just eroding because the soil's dead, so it erodes faster. And we've done this to ourselves. And it's interesting to me that we're in a situation now where we're the people that have to prove that what we're recommending works, when it's what worked for the vast time that humans have been around and doing agriculture. For 10,000 years, we've had this less than 100-year true experiment with this chem ag. And we're kind of put back on our heels to, well, we couldn't feed humanity without all these chemicals.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. That let's see, the universities and the professors are paid for with our tax dollars, and so we build the labs, we set up the universities and all that sort of thing. But the professors need some money to do the experiments, do their trials, and so on. And so the pesticide companies, with their really high profit margin, they were probably making 50-60% profit margin, where beneficial insectaries are kind of like farming operations, except we've got millions ahead of livestock instead of hundreds or thousands ahead of livestock. That our profit margin is right around 5%, and so there's not a whole lot of money to do a lot of promotion and buying professors and politicians and that sort of thing. So with the tremendous profits of the fertilizer and pesticide industry, they were able to pay the professors in the university to do studies on how these things performed in the field. And so those were the basis of the recommendations for the Cooperative Extension Service, the farm advisors that advise farmers, okay, this is the scientific way of doing things. And so that became the basis of what was taught for a couple of generations since about 1950 in our ag schools, our master gardener programs, and on and on and on. And so that has been, kind of like this background noise or the subtext, of everything going on in agriculture is this promotion, because this is what we have studies on. And so with all that, it's a steep uphill slope as far as education goes, to get farmers to realize, okay, these things that these smart people have been recommending over the last couple of generations, and that your father and your grandfather used, they're not good. You're actually shooting yourself in the foot when you use this shit.
I think it's interesting that it is the fact that it will work initially that stuck us with it, because everybody went all in, and the government provided funding for everybody to go all in, and the nice government man and the nice fertilizer man and the nice pesticide man all came out to your farm and told you about money you could get, and then it did work. Like, our yields did go up. And one of the problems we have, I think, is that people again, I hate us and them, but people on our side of this don't acknowledge that this works for a time. It declines across the sphere of time, and it works less and less and less. and correcting the problem becomes more and more difficult. So the existing farmers just double down on what they already know: more chemical, more fertilizer, more GMO seed. And we're kind of in this place where these guys feel stuck, because what they'll tell you is, don't tell me, buddy, because I'm the one that's going to lose what I have if I don't get production this year. I don't have time to bridge that. But there are ways to do that. And I think that's part of what this working group that you were part of in California was looking at. Can we dig into that a little bit? Like,
Sure.
What exactly was this work group, and how did you end up being part of it?
Yeah. So backing up just to your talk about it worked initially. That was when we had a lot of organic matter in the soil, and organic matter is kind of like our short handle for saying life.
Yeah.
That there was a huge number of bacteria, fungi, protozoa, nematodes, ciliates, all this incredible life forms in the soil. And so the use of the chemical fertilizers and chemical pesticides actually killed off those life forms and converted their bodies into nutrients for the plant. And so so you could do that for a little while there was that reservoir of life forms and the resistant organic matter that you could literally burn up out of the soil. So, going down, starting out 8, 10, 12% organic matter when, the prairies were extant in the middle part of our country there, that, down around 1.5% organic matter. And any life forms there are mostly disease-causing organisms. So, not a whole lot of support, from the ecology, from the, so the context of applying these pesticides is really important. Okay, so there's this really nasty pesticide called chlorpyrifos. It's this horrible brain-sucking pesticide that causes nerve damage and cancer and such. And it is a really bad actor. And so a number of friends of mine and the social justice and farm labor groups and so on got together and pushed the state to own up and ban it in California. In other words, remove its registration so it's not legal. Okay. For most uses. There was a couple uses that were left, but pretty insignificant, and most of those have stopped. And so to placate the farmers who said, "Oh no, you're taking away my tools," they set up this chlorpyrifos working group to look at, okay, in this situation, what less toxic pesticide can we use to manage this pest? And so they went through this. They had this big spreadsheet of all these, pests and situations and so on. And so that was nice and helpful, but a lot of people looked at it and then said, no, this is not enough. We want system change. We don't want the next less toxic pesticide. This is a game to perpetuate the pesticide industry, and what we want is to go back to growing things in harmony with nature. And so the Sustainable Pest Management Work Group was set up, and there was a broad stakeholder group of 25 people from different aspects of producing food and producing pesticides and promoting pesticides and that sort of thing. And so it was incredibly broad spectrum. So there were farm worker groups, the tribes were represented, the pesticide company, biggest one on the planet, was there, Bayer, aka Monsanto, and then some commodity groups, some this woman who grows or produces biological pesticides, and then some people who are concerned with health. There was this Chamaco study that followed the effects of pesticides on the children of farm workers. And so The lady that set that up was one of the members of the group. So we had everybody around the table. And so there was about 25 people associated with agriculture, and then about another 8 people that are associated with urban pest control. And so this covers, the field agriculture and also in the city. That about half the pesticides used are in the city. And there's a lot of spraying for ants and roaches and all that stuff. And then there's the toxic baits for the rats and birds and on and on and on. And so they looked at all these structural things that could be done to set the stage so that you didn't need to use anything toxic.
Gotcha. You mentioned some of the people, like how broad was this work group, and did it get anywhere in the end? I mean, has anything really changed as far as the state of California, as far as the practices with this? Because I find it interesting how toxic some of the stuff is that California's like, yeah, spray that on the field, no problem. Because then that Prop 20 or Prop whatever, where like everything causes cancer, everything has a warning label. You buy dried kelp and it has a California cancer warning label because there might be a fleck of mercury in there somewhere. And then they're like, okay with all of this toxin, sprayed on the food that people are eating.
Mm-hmm. So what is it we really need to do? When it comes down to it is we need to talk to our neighbor, the people that are living next door and that drive in, push the button on the remote, and the garage door comes up, and they drive their car into the garage. Whatever the broad action is, what we need to do as individuals, talk to our neighbors and have those difficult conversations. How do we work together? How do we, run our communities so that we can have health, security, abundance, and not all these other things that are essential to life. And so we sat down with all these people that, generally considered to be adversaries, on the other side.
Yeah.
And had those difficult conversations. And it was amazing and emotionally draining, although a lot of the time they're like, what are you talking about? That no, we don't need these things. No, you can't mitigate that by putting some language on the label. You're still putting toxins out in the environment. And so we hashed through all these different strategies, that will help to support farmers and people doing pest control in the city and so on, how to take all these little steps to get away from using the toxins. And so it was an amazing process, and I could have wished for more. I think everybody didn't get all that they wanted. So I guess that maybe say something, that if everybody's unhappy, then maybe it's a good product. And so we covered all these broad areas, and we're finally able to get all 25 of the members of the work group to sign off on the final document that it's not perfect, but it's good enough. I can live with this. And this is what we're putting out to the public then, as far as, literally a roadmap or a path to get off of pesticides. So like you're saying about, the life in the soil and so on, that you can't go cold turkey. So it's just like getting off of, injecting heroin or speed or whatever, that you can't just stop doing it. That we've destroyed the ecosystem using these chemicals, And so you need to have a heavy duty support structure to help farmers, give them support in that transition. That if they just stop using the pesticides, that their crops are going to be eaten up for a couple of years by all the insects, because they're not growing healthy plants, because they've destroyed the soil food web, the diversity on the soil surface as far as plants go, and they've destroyed the ecology in the neighborhood, all the birds and lizards and bats and all these other critters, that contribute to controlling the pests in our field.
Do you feel that, like, in this group, that voices were heard, and was it successful at reaching a consensus? I mean, you said maybe not everybody was happy, and sometimes that's good, but like, I think one of the things in a work group, for it to feel like it had any level of success, is everybody felt like they were heard, and that there was some final agreement that everybody at least got something that they were looking for out of.
Yeah. So some of the farm worker advocates felt that sometimes when they were saying what they felt was needed, or their observations or such, that those suggestions weren't reliably recorded.
Yeah.
There's a number of things I said, like starting out, that that the university is acting as a marketing arm of the pesticide industry. That somehow that observation didn't get recorded.
No, of course not.
And then after the fact, CAPCA, the California Agricultural Pest Control Advisor organization, said, "Oh, we didn't have enough pest control advisors at the table." And I took that as a personal affront, of course, because I'm a pest control advisor and a member of CAPCA, and I was representing what I thought the pest control advisors should be advising, and not being pesticide salespersons that have some kind of extra special promotion from the state by having this license.
Yeah, they always claim that pesticide use is science-based agriculture.
Mm-hmm.
Where the science says this is what to do. Now, how do you respond to that? I'm sure part of that response is going to be, well, what you just said.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like, science is bought. Mm-hmm. But I don't actually think it's a very scientific conclusion that using something that is toxic to people when they eat the food is good science, or that destroying all life in a field is good science, or the result that we've had, which is this declining success rate over 7 decades now, really, is very scientific. So how do you respond? Because I'm sure that there was a lot of science pushback in this group.
Indeed. Early on, we heard this kind of like drumbeat. We need science-based, decision making here.
Yeah,
and I can agree with that. But whose science?
Yeah.
That remember tobacco? There's a whole field of tobacco science that it took 50 years from the first study that showed there was a connection between smoking cigarettes and lung cancer to get this stinking little label on a pack of cigarettes that says you smoke these, you're going to increase your chance of getting lung cancer. 50 years. And during that time, the tobacco industry worked with these marketing companies, these public relation companies, to funnel money into these professors to do studies that would cause doubt as to whether the tobacco was causing these diseases or not. The Merchants of Doubt was actually one of the books on the subject. And so the same marketing company started working and promoting Roundup and bringing up doubt as to whether Roundup is a carcinogen and causes problems and such. And so Monsanto engaged industrial biotest labs of Northbrook, Illinois, to do studies on its pesticide and PCB products. It's about 7 years after they submitted these studies and such, shit hit the fan. And IBT Labs would be the center of one of the most far-reaching scandals in modern science, as thousands of its studies were revealed through EPA and FDA investigations to be fraudulent or grossly inadequate. IBT conducted significant quantities of research for pharmaceutical companies, chemical manufacturers, and other industrial clients at its height during the 50s, 60s, and 70s. IBT operated the largest facility of its kind and performed more than 1/3 of all toxicity testing in the United States. And so the initial toxicity study of Roundup was found to be fraudulent. And so Monsanto made a deal with EPA. Okay, we'll repeat that. And to this date, it has not been repeated. So the largest selling pesticide on the market is out there without a valid toxicity study. And so we step back and observe all of these shenanigans and think, wait a minute, whose science are we talking about here? That is it, the science that we read about in our school books, you make a hypothesis and design some studies to test that hypothesis, and then you objectively observe the results of those experiments. That no, this is science in the service of the corporate profit motive. And so when we think doing science-based, yes, science-based, but not the science in service of the corporations. And
yeah, so, I mean, because the whole science thing is so, you've got the whole bias built into this, but it's also like you can bias the study by directing what the study's supposed to do, right? So like, what are you studying? Are you studying the impact of this pesticide in trace amounts in my food over 25 years? Or are you studying if I have two fields completely devoid of all biological life other than the corn I put in it, and I spray one with a pesticide and I don't spray the other one with the pesticide, will the one I sprayed have a higher yield, right? Because the answer is probably it probably will, because both fields are just out of balance with nature. So you'll need the pesticide to get by. So you can say scientifically based, we get more corn or we get more almonds or whatever you're growing, but it doesn't mean that you've actually investigated scientifically the impact on the environment, the impact on the consumer, the impact on the worker, and the long-term yield impact. Because what we did with the scientific method, which is really useful to humanity, is we say we have to separate things we know from mysticism. So we need to isolate down to a single variable so that we can test that variable against a control group. It makes perfect sense until you've completely disrupted everything in a natural system, and now you're testing a single variable. Now that science can be peer reviewed, and the peer group goes, they did what they said, their conclusions match their research, and so this is a valid study. It doesn't actually say that the peer review doesn't mean you're right. It means you did what you said the way that you did, and the conclusions you got from doing it the way you said you would do it are valid for that method, if that makes sense, right? It doesn't mean we now all bless this as the way, but that's how it gets presented.
So when we look at an agricultural field, we're looking at a chaotic system that there's all kinds of things going on. There's influences coming in and out. And so it's totally absurd to have, set up a conventional linear experiment in an agricultural field, because you can't control all the variables. and fields next to each other, they're going to have different influences. And so what we need to look at that situation is the mathematics of chaos. That for chaotic systems, the best thing you can do is do a bunch of trials or observations and then see where you get a cluster of results versus, yes or no. And so when you think about it in those terms, repeated observations over a number of years, a number of farms and that sort of thing are more valid than a supposedly controlled experiment over one season on one farm. And so to do research on that, the most effective way of doing that is to go down to the local coffee shop and talk to the old timers and say, okay, when this happened, a decade ago, how did you manage it? Or what are the influences that cause, these bugs to come into the field, or what are the surrounding conditions when you have major powdery mildew, show up on your crop. And so talking to the old timers, you're harvesting all those observations over many years and in a community over quite a few different farms and situations and such. And so what we explored in a separate subgroup, ways of knowing. And so there's a strong push, for this conventional science. And so, bringing up some of these problems, with the tobacco science and the IBT labs that was faking, these toxicology studies, that we needed to look at other ways of knowing. So, some of our friends with the indigenous groups, were strongly supportive of looking at traditional ecological knowledge, TEK or IK, indigenous knowledge, as a valid way of looking at what is true. So in conventional society, our culture here, we've accepted science as the arbiter of what is true. And we kind of give a nod to experiential knowledge. And then sometimes we talk about direct cognition, of just realizing things, on a spiritual level. So there's this broad range of ways of knowing things, of what ways of understanding the system that produces our food, and how to evaluate it and how to move forward and how to refine the system to grow things more in harmony with nature.
And we've kind of hit on this, but this is an uphill battle. So you guys came out of this work group with some level of a roadmap. Can you talk about how that might work, and how is it going to be successful in the face of a huge amount of influence, where we basically have government for profit, we have regulatory capture, we have capture of the university system? So what's it look like, and how does it actually get implemented with that opposition?
Yeah, so there's a lot of moving parts to the whole thing. So starting out with regulation. So DPR could not register the highly toxic, highly hazardous materials, so they're not legally available to farmers. When you think about that in context of community rights and so on, here the state is giving a license to these pesticide companies to sell to farmers these toxins that go out into the environment, and they cause harm to people, and they harm the environment. And so that is not considering, the health of the farm workers, the health and welfare of the neighbors, and so on. So these farmers are putting toxins out into our space, or in kind of formal legal terms, into our common area. And so we need to have a voice in this. And our voice as individuals has been suppressed, but now they're listening. So we need to raise our voice and say, this is no longer acceptable. And then pest control advisors under these plans will no longer be able to get paid for recommending toxic pesticides. There's about 4,000 California licensed pest control advisors in the state that recommend hazardous pesticides. And when they recommend these pesticides, they make more money. So there's an economic incentive for them to push the stuff that's going to help them make the pool payment, or pay for Sally's college bills, and so on. And farmers have relied on these guys to advise them for so long that they don't know anything else. So we need to have a CY, a cover your assets, program for the farmers, a safety net, as it were.
Mm-hmm.
They're taking risks. We need to pay them to cover losses when they use these SPM programs, like something like USDA crop insurance. Every time you put a seed in the ground, you take a risk at every turn, that there's all these different influences of things might go wrong. And as you build the life and diversity in your soil, in your environment, then you'll be able to, you'll take less of a risk when you put that seed in the ground, and be able to have more assurance that you'll be able to get a crop and be able to pay your bills and continue farming the next year. And so these farmers are going to need a lot of help. So there's a lot of aspects of support for farmers to get, good, solid knowledge on how to do this. So our number of farm advisors has dropped by about 50-60% in the last decade or so. And so, getting more farm advisors, especially that have credentials in organic farming and biological control, would be really helpful. And then who's the best person to teach a farmer something? It's another farmer.
Sure.
And so setting up these situations where you can have peer-to-peer sharing of knowledge, are extremely valuable and extremely effective. And so having some support for these local farmer groups to get together and talk through, okay, here's this problem, what's everybody, do for this situation, and just kind of compare notes and hash out, some of the better programs for them. And then markets. We can favor food grown without pesticides, call it SPM organic, and especially local, which in California means, grown in California. All this stuff is very exciting. So the state recommended preference in purchasing, how to buy food for all the kitchens in hospitals, jails, prisons, schools, university, cafeterias, all these places where the state is feeding people. That think about it. If all those facilities would have starting out, like maybe 10% local SPM priority, and then going up to maybe 60% over a period of a number of years, that would be a tremendous increase in the market for local organic food. And so that will, kind of float all the boats of all the farmers in those areas then to grow for that market. And so there's some things that could be done in those situations where the the facility would, kind of prepay or guarantee that, okay, if you grow this for us, we'll cover your losses, or, through some kind of state insurance program would help support them and give them confidence to take the risk to grow their food. So my first priority would be for daycare centers for kids. That it's exciting how food is sourced that supports farmers to stop pesticides. So basically, we'd be paying them with market access. Imagine serving healthy SPM, organic, pesticide-free food in hospitals that actually supports the health of the patients. What a novel idea. And especially, for drug rehab centers and mental hospitals, where they're already challenged with, their metabolism, not, supporting their healthy thoughts and so on. Having healthy food would be critical, for those. And then bank loans, insurance, and a number of other programs like this. Organic farmers are penalized for using organic methods, today. That historically it's been difficult but mostly impossible for organic farmers to get FDA loans for their crops if they're not going to be spraying with all these toxic pesticides. And similarly for a number of institutions in the state, so that there could be pressure put onto the banks and the lending institutions to support these farmers, in their transition. And access to land. Some places a lot of places in California, you can't purchase land and pay mortgage by growing veggies or fruit. A couple of years ago, you could pay for the mortgage by growing cannabis, but the market's fallen out of that. So I think the current price is something like $300 a pound, which doesn't support, a whole lot of input and labor and such. But the average age of the average farmer is about 60 now in the United States. And so just to replace those, we're going to need a lot more farmers trained, especially in biological methods of farming. And if we're looking at decreasing the size of the farm, so it's more, human powered and animal powered versus, powered with these huge behemoth tractors that, you have to huck your farm up to eyeballs, to be able to acquire them, that we're going to need a whole lot more, maybe a tenfold over, replacement of those current farmers to farm on little plots of land and feed their neighbors, feed their communities. That we don't need to fucking feed the world. That's a marketing hype from the fertilizer industry.
Yeah.
That we need to make our farm a sacrifice zone, so that we can put all these chemical fertilizers and chemical pesticides, because we got to feed the world. Who gave us that mandate? Anyway, it's like, wow.
Well, there's a lot of BS that were sold on the line of that the United States is responsible for the whole world, right?
Yeah,
we have to feed the world, we have to defend the world, we have to protect the world, we have to dictate who's allowed to do what. It's the same pattern, right?
Yeah,
you get the same pattern over and over again. We have this moral obligation of Americans to worry about everybody in the world who has lots of oil and gas. Maybe not this place, but that place. And if it's convenient, then it's the whole world, right? Yeah. So we'll tear the hell out of this place. We'll ruin it. We'll extract all the rare earth elements, but we have to feed these people. It's the same pattern. But when you were talking, and there's probably people who expect me to hammer you for this as an anarcho-libertarian. I'm not big on government anything, but I'm also a realist and a pragmatist and understand where we are. And a lot of this money is being spent anyway, and it's how the system runs. And if we can redirect it, then maybe we can actually get somewhere better. Because when you were talking about like some level of insurance if a crop fails in the first year, they have lower yields and all. Earlier, you'd mentioned a drug addict, right? And I think this is an analogy we need to keep coming back to with this. The longer a person's been on drugs, the harder their rehabilitation is, and the more professional help they need. Somebody that went out and used drugs a few times, started to get the monkey on their back of addiction, but they didn't really go down the tunnel, and they realized, whoa, wait, they may not need to go to a rehab center. They might not need it. They might just go, no more drugs, boom. But if you take somebody that's been on drugs for a couple of years on a regular basis, especially something highly addictive like meth or heroin or something like that, some of those people, if you do not put them in a proper medically supported rehab, will die. Okay, some of these farms are that heroin addict or that opium addict or whatever. Like, they are at the edge of whether or not it's going to survive as a farm in the first place. And if we don't have some sort of a rehab program, then they're not going to make it. But that same drug addict that's going to die in 10 years, he'll at least live 10 more years if he keeps doing his drugs. And that's how a lot of these farms are going to be. If we don't create this transition zone for them, they're going to be like, well, I'd rather survive another 10 years than die now. That's the business decision being made. And if we don't legitimately accept that reality, we're not going to get anywhere, because this is what I've noticed. I love the peer-to-peer thing. The farmer who's like, look at all of my yields. Instead of growing 2 crops, I'm growing 10 now. I'm making 10 times more money. My inputs are almost nothing. That farmer that does that talk and that education, he's always like, and we're now in year 12. And when he goes back and tells his story year 1 and year 2, they're generally not very good. And he had to get through that to get to where he is. And it does sound a lot like a guy walking in front of a Narcotics Anonymous group and going, I'm a recovering addict, and I've been a recovering addict since 12 years ago, and my life is great now. He usually has a story about hitting rock freaking bottom where those other people are at the beginning. And if we don't create that support system, then that problem, eventually I believe it will correct itself, because we won't be able to produce food with it anymore. And we'll have to do something else. But I think it'd be better to save the patient. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Yeah. It's often quoted that we're destroying the life, the tilth in the soil in the Midwest, the breadbasket of the country. And that, a number of years ago, they were talking about 60 more harvests before the soil is completely played out. So imagine the Gobi Desert in the center part of the United States. That's where we're headed. And as far as climate change, there's CO2 is important, but that's like 5% of the effective global warming gases. And the most important one is water. That we need to manage our water more effectively. So when you destroy the tilth, the structure of the soil, so that there's air pores down through the whole structure of the soil, held to, those pores are held by bacteria and fungi, working together to make this 3-dimensional structure. So you have a balance of mineral particles of water and air in the physical structure of the soil, so that when the rain falls, it soaks in. If there's nothing covering the soil and the soil structure is tight and destroyed from tilling and use of fertilizers and herbicides and such, the water hits the surface of the soil and pounds it like a hammer and seals that soil surface, so the water runs off, carrying, soil. What's our biggest export? Agricultural export. It's soil. It's going down the Gulf. It's going down every river out to the ocean, and creating dead zones around the estuaries. So we need to think about the basic principles of healthy soil. Keep it armored. Roots in the ground as long as you can. And so you think about it. You know about latent heat of evaporation, right?
Yeah.
You get out of the pool and the wind's blowing. You feel cold.
Yeah.
because the water evaporating
Yeah.
is carrying the heat away.
Yeah.
And so when you think about this, the hard compacted soil, when the sun hits it, it heats up the soil, and then that creates sensible heat or heat in that area. And so that's a big part of our global warming. And so then you move that to moist soil, and the sun hits it, the water evaporates, it carries the heat away. Better yet, you've got plants growing on that soil, and when the sun hits the plants transpire, pulling more water up from its root zone. And in the stoma, the breathing holes of the leaves of the plants, there's these bacteria like Aerobacter aerogenes. And it just happens to be one of the best things for nucleating 1 million molecules of water to form a droplet of rain. And so having plant cover on the surface of the soil, you can grow rain. And you can moderate the heating effect of the sun. And so we have an existential imperative here to take care of the soil, to be able to harvest the water, keep it in place instead of causing a flood, downstream, and to mitigate, the heating effect of the sun.
The heat island effect is real, and you can see it in a lot of ways for yourself. One is, I live in Dallas-Fort Worth area. I'm fortunately out of the main part of the city, but you watch these storms come in this time of year, and we're always concerned about hail, tornadoes, and straight line winds here. Mm-hmm. And you watch these storms, and as soon as they hit the metro areas, they explode. And they explode because of that heat island effect of all that concrete. And you think, well, out in the country, not as much. But like you're saying, when you have exposed dry soil, I'm sure you've had this experience. It's kind of hot out, kind of feel the heat from overhead, but you're walking through a field with a lot of vegetation or something. You don't really have shade, but you have covered ground. And you don't feel a lot of reflective heat from the ground. And you walk over bare dirt, and it's not quite as bad, but it's almost like all of a sudden you're walking over a sidewalk or a parking lot.
Yeah.
And if we think about how much of the year some of these fields spend, where even if there's some growth, it's a soy field, the plant's this big, and 80% of the dirt is exposed in surface dry. Like, that is a massive amount of heat island effect. And not only will it, I talk about how to cause storms to blow up. Well, that's if there is a storm. A lot of times that heat island effect can also cause high pressure systems that make storms not happen in the first place. So you end up with droughts. And you throw a La Nina cycle on top of that, like we had the last 2 years, and you got a whole lot of the country that's like a new color red for the drought map that they had to invent because it was that bad compared to typical. And so I think that's something that can't be overlooked. Is there's so much to this. Last time I had you on, we spent most of the time talking about beneficial insects. And what we're getting in today is there's hundreds of factors in this. And I think this is what happens when somebody starts to systematize a thing into a commodity. Every time there's a problem, there's an incentive to never say, okay, what did we change? Let's put it back. It's, well, what can we add? It's additive rather than retractive. So we start doing chemical fertilizers. Everything grows really good. The life in the soil dies. We start having pests. Pests come. Well, instead of saying, wait a minute, what? This didn't used to be a problem. What did we do that made this happen? Maybe we need to go undo it. We say, I know. We'll take this other toxic chemical and we'll kill the bugs. So we kill the bugs. And now we further denuded the life in the fields. And then all of a sudden we start having massive problems with weeds. And we say, hey, these are tall crops. We used to not even care about weeds. The weeds grew underneath them. It didn't matter. Now the weeds are a problem. Instead of saying, well, what did we do? Oh, okay, now we need to spray something on that will kill the weeds. But wait a minute. If we do that, it'll kill the plant that we want to grow. Okay, so now instead of saying, wait a minute, how do we create this, massive Frankenweed problem? We say, I know, we'll develop a seed that's genetically modified. So now we can spray the herbicide on top of the food that we're going to eat and kill the weed without killing the soybean or the corn or what have you. And it is that additive approach where we end up with this multiple layer of problem. And they say, well, if you stop doing this, production will crash. They're not wrong. We have to stop doing all of it, or at least keep components of it in that transition phase.
Yeah, so the heat island actually pushes the storm clouds away. And so it rains where the soil is moist. And so taking care of the soil is, again, an ecological imperative, an existential imperative. And the use of the chemical fertilizers and chemical pesticides and so on is an essential part of taking care of the soil. And so these practices to get off of the toxic pesticides are one that is very important as far as the soil health, and then as far as climate change and climate mitigation. So the more that we take care of the soil, the more it will rain. So I think a lot of the drought in California is self-inflicted by our not taking care of the soil. And we've got huge areas of land that is in row crop veggies or in orchard trees where they use Roundup to keep the weeds down. And so it's a major problem here. So again, we can grow rain, and we need to focus on all of these things. So it's real simple, actually, that we just need to change all of everything right now. And so we're going to have to have everyone working together to get the job done. So yay, team, we're on it.
It seems like a big tall order, though, to get such an entrenched system moving. I guess the only thing that gives me a lot of hope that it's going to happen is I think the problem is becoming so obvious that even the people in the defenders of the problem, the regulatory apparatus that's been captured, is like, yeah, guys, if we keep doing this, we're all going to starve, right? Because we talk about the risk to the farmer if they change too quickly, but the risk to humanity is no food. Because I promise you, pesticide might kill you sooner or later, but no food will kill your ass quick. So we need to start growing our own. I teach that all the time, encourage local agriculture and all, but we also have to take I talked about this when I did a presentation on permaculture years ago, probably 8 years ago now, that we underestimate the scale of the problem of food production just in our country. I'm with you. I'm not worried about feeding the world. We feed ourselves first, and then we can worry about exports of food. But it was something to the effect of one local average size supermarket in our country. So these were metro markets, because this is aggregate average of everybody, about $600 million in sales for one mega mart a year. And so you think about how much food it takes to stock one of those, and then start looking around and see how many there are. And this is what we're trying not to compete with, but to replace. And when we start looking at it that way, we start to realize, like, if you have a 50% shortfall of production in a single year, we have starving people, right? If we don't have other places making up for it in some way. And when I talk to people from like NRCS and stuff like that, they're like, we know. You don't have to tell us anymore. We know we're doing. So I think there is an impetus there. Do you think it will continue to spread, like the kind of thing that started in California? Do you think that'll get out into the broader, like, United States, EPA and start to spread around the country? Because if it doesn't, boy, you really better start growing your own food. I mean, that's your other alternative, I guess.
Well, as you often say, we need to take care of ourselves, our family, and then our community. So everybody needs to take some responsibility for feeding themselves. And so even in a apartment with a little balcony, you can grow some lettuces, some culinary herbs or something like that to supply some of your nutrition, buy your calories and grow your nutrition. So we all need to play our part. And so I, worked almost for a couple of years on this roadmap to get off of toxic pesticides. And like any government report, it'll probably has the chance of sitting on a shelf and gathering dust since it's a PDF.
You just gave me a flashback to the original Raiders of the Lost Ark and the Ark box going into the big thing, and we've got top men working on it, and it's just laying in this giant. But that's always the risk with government, is it not?
And so, what's going to make the difference? It's all these people standing up and saying, "We want something different.
Yeah.
We want healthy food, and we want a healthy environment." So I don't have a whole lot of faith in government, but I have faith in people that working together, working in our community, talking to our neighbors, we can progress in a sense, to the way things used to be when we grew food on our little farms or gardens and shared it with our neighbors and so on. There's still some places in the United States, where everybody's growing, maybe 20% of their food and then swapping with their neighbors, to get another 20, 30% of their food. And how can we do this, kind of in a sense, going back to the land in style, with computers and instant communications around the planet and so on. And the, digital currencies are definitely, seem to be a part of that process. But seeing all this craziness, it breaks my heart, because I know that we don't need pesticides, and we are damaging people and wildlife and the environment, and all that wasted potential, that loss of opportunity of all these people to live healthy, productive lives that are suffering with cancer, ADHD, diabetes, and obesity, when the solution is simple: just eat natural food, as fresh, natural, minimal processing as you can get. It's actually very simple. As Bill Mollison said, all the problems of the world can be solved in the garden. It's kind of figurative and also kind of an interesting philosophical take on the situation.
Indeed. We've been talking about this from a standpoint of like regulatory issues and larger, broader scale. But what you're most known for is, you guys raise beneficial insects and you help people implement plans. And I think it's important to talk about how if you wanted to get a specific predatory insect on your property that addresses a specific pest, that's only part of the equation. So like you mentioned earlier that there was this particular pest that was moving in, and the solution that the guy came up with was you just plant these, nectary plants so that as they're coming in, they're already being ambushed and creating habitat. So can you talk a little bit about how if you're going to start going to someone like you and purchasing beneficials, that you also need to have a place for them to live if they're going to stick around for any length of time?
So we talked about how with the toxic pesticides and fertilizers and herbicides and all those sides that we pretty much destroyed the environment. So we need to give the farmer some support in that transition period. And so we need to kickstart the biology. And so there's some people have been working on some pretty sophisticated systems. We're really impressed with the work of John Kemp with the Advancing Eco Agriculture and the combinations of foliar sprays with nutrients and the microbes and so on that help to support the plants and such. But there's still this transition period that you need to observe the pests that are developing, and then put out a small number of the beneficial insects that will prey on those pests. So the predators are things like lacewing and ladybugs and syrphid flies and on and on and on. But you'll be able to put them out and decrease the pest population. But to get them to reproduce, often the beneficial insects will need a source of nectar for energy to get them through their adult stage and give them energy to search for the pest so they can lay their eggs next to the pest, or for parasites, lay the eggs in the pest. And so what we work with farmers to do is to evaluate the relative ratio of the good bugs to the bad bugs. So my father-in-law developed this insect vacuum, and it sucks the bugs into a very fine mesh bag, and can look at that and see, okay, we got all pest insects in this field. So we need to put out some beneficial insects to achieve a balance between the good bugs and the bad bugs. Often it's something like, if you have 10 pests, you need like one beneficial insect that will feed on those pests to bring the balance down in a couple of weeks. And then if we take a vacuum sample, then, and when we see that, oh, okay, there's a number of pests here, but there's quite a few beneficial insects here. And the beneficials have a really good chance of controlling the pest insects in like 2 weeks. So then you don't need to do anything, just come back in another week or two and see what the status is. And so there's the basics of integrated pest management in a sustainable format, or an ecological format of monitoring for the pest and the beneficial. We're using soft pesticides. We're not anti-pesticide, just use the soft ones. Soap and water is a really dandy pesticide. And we've got at least 1,000 years of use history with that, right? So you just don't get it in your eyes, and you don't drink too much of it, and you'll be fine. So you can knock down pests with soap, oil, clays, like DE or diatomaceous earth or kaolin clay or something like that. There's a number of low-risk ways of managing the pest. Build habitat to draw in the beneficials, and then release beneficial insects. So that if you do all these other things right, then you don't need to release beneficial insects, because you're growing them by the way that you farm. So the process, we know about this. We know how to do this now. That back in the early days of the organic movement, we need just organic matter. We need compost. And so we put this really stinky fermented manure onto the field, and and it did some benefit, but it kind of set the plants back. So now we know how to make good compost. We know how to make compost extracts and compost tea to maximize the benefits of a little bit of compost on a big piece of land. And we know a lot more about how to get nutrition to plants using things like seaweed. And then for a local DIY, juicing the local weeds and using those as your source of your fertility for a foliar spray. And then a lot of refinements of how to support different things in the soil food web. So you were talking earlier about the weeds and how we need to control them. You can manage the weeds very easily by just making different minerals available in the soil and having a different structure to the soil food web. So I often think about, okay, trying to convince somebody of this, take a field and let's go along in stripes with certain nutrients and soil amendments, like lime, sulfur, seaweed, compost, humic acid, things like that in stripes, and then repeat that at right angles. And then you have combinations of all those different things, and just see what that does to the resident weed population. So you'd have these little patches of different kinds of weeds coming up. In the average square foot of soil, you'll have 10,000 weed seeds lying there waiting for the right time when their conditions are met for their germination to start growing. I've heard about fields that didn't have clover in them for 30 years. They apply lime to the field and lots and lots of clover pops up. So we can control the weeds and manage them by our nutrient program and feeding the soil food web, rather than using the chemical fertilizers to feed the plant.
Yeah, I think another thing we have to look at with like the whole beneficial insect thing, like how detrimental the pesticide solutions are. And obviously, if the beneficial is infected with the pesticide, that's bad. But the other way I look at this is, so, your lacewings, your ladybugs, et cetera, those are your lions and your leopards, right? Mm-hmm. They're your predators. Your wasps are your cougars and what have you. And if you think of like Africa and on the plains, if you went out and killed all the zebras and all the wildebeests and all the plains game, and you said, we're going to protect the lions and we're going to protect the leopards and we're going to protect the cheetahs and no one will ever hurt them, it wouldn't be long before they'd all be dead too. Yep. They have to have something to eat. So when we wipe out the pest, the predators die because they don't have any food. And then enough of the pests survive to develop resistance to these toxins. And then the pests come back in abundance. And there's no lions, there's no leopards, there's the wildebeests are now eating the plains to the ground like goats, down to the last speck of green, because we wiped out the food supply of the predator and therefore the predator. And so I don't think we can continue to look at seeing any pest insect at all as a bad thing. If there's not pest insects in some quantity, there's nothing for the predator to eat. So the predator won't set up residence and it won't start reproducing and it won't live where you are. It needs to have something to feed on.
Yeah, precisely. That it's not, presence or absence of pest. It's the relative numbers of the predators to the pest. So in biological control, we talk about 3 different aspects or different kinds of interactions. So there's the predators that a lot of people are familiar with. So everybody remembers ladybugs, from their kids' books, eating the aphids and so on. But there's also parasites, and we know about those from the movie Alien, right?
Yeah.
That there's something that lives inside of us. And so the parasites can feed inside of the insect, or they can be on the outside of the insect. And then there's pathogens, the diseases that make insects sick. One of the first biological insecticides was BT, or Bacillus thuringiensis, a bacteria that makes caterpillars sick. And so it was fantastic material to come out because it was very selective, that it just killed caterpillars. It didn't kill bees. It didn't kill predatory and parasitic flies or anything else. Just moth larvae that we're feeding on the leaves of the plant.
Yeah.
So that was a tremendous development. And we also need to think about antagonists. So sometimes insects are there and they're taking up space in the plant ecosystem, on the plant leaf or whatever. And so if that space is occupied, it's not available for other things to come in. A long time ago, we used to have these things called phone booths. And that was a really great analogy that, when somebody was in using the phone in the phone booth, you couldn't go in and use the phone. I need to find another, analogy for today, but taking up space is an important aspect of controlling pests. And so think about on the leaf surface. One of the really simple things you can do to manage disease on the leaf surface is just spray whey, the liquid product from making cheese and such, that sort of thing. That has some proteins and things like that will feed the beneficial microbes, and they'll grow very nicely. And that space on the leaf surface will be taken up and not available for the powdery mildew, leaf spot, all kinds of plant diseases, to come in and occupy that space.
If one thing's in a niche, then it's hard for another thing to use that niche, right? A displacement theory.
Yeah.
It makes a lot of sense. I talk about it with snakes all the time. People are like, I want to get rid of all the rat snakes. I'm like, well, if you want rattlers, right, then that's what you do. And they're like, well, rat snakes don't eat rattlers. No, king snakes do that. You're right, they don't, but they occupy space and they feed on rodents, and that's what the rattler wants. So if you clear out all the rat snakes and all the burrows are open and the rats start to breed, then your rattlers are going to move in. And I'm not saying if you leave the rat snakes there, there'll never be a rattler. I'm saying that if you remove everything, something will fill, like nature fills vacuums. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are. I have one pest, actually it's two, but they both do the same thing, that it doesn't seem like anything eats. Yeah. Squash bugs and squash vine borers. Nothing I know eats them. I threw a leaf covered in squash bugs to some chickens once, and there's like 6 of them, and they all looked at it like, I don't think so. And then there's the one chicken that's like that buddy you had in school that you could get to do anything. The other chickens are like, give it a shot. So she went down and ate that thing. And if you can translate chicken into English, it was, oh, no. And she ran away. So even a chicken won't eat this thing. And if a chicken won't eat, I don't know what will. And what I'm going to try this year is more of a deterrent. What I've heard is one of the best pest deterrents you can spray a plant with is diluted wood vinegar, which is basically liquid smoke that is a byproduct of biochar production. And I'm going to try that on several different squash varieties, because what I've done up till now, we have the vine borers so bad. They actually, the squash bugs are, you can basically plant enough squash and they're not a problem anymore. The vine borers, they go into the vine and they eat the center of the vine out. So I've been growing like C. moschetta species of squash, because they grow a really thin, hard, gnarly vine that those things don't want. And I'm wondering, is there anything that eats either one of those things? Because I can't find anything that does.
Sure enough. They call them stink bugs for a reason, that they stink. And sometimes you can get chickens to eat plant bugs, stink bugs, and they'll eat them, but then you may have an off flavor in your eggs. So, good news, bad news. We all feed on something, and other things feed on us. That if there's a bug there that's causing a problem, you have to think, okay, there should be 4 or 5 different things feeding on the egg stage. There should be a number of predators on the adult stage. There should be a bunch of different kinds of diseases and such. And so what's missing here? And so with the squash vine borer, that's a moth larva.
Yeah.
So we've got trichogramma, a moth egg parasite that lays its egg in the egg of the moth, and so a little wasp comes out of that egg instead of a caterpillar. And so if mama's laying her egg on the squash vine, then it's available then for trichogramma to lay an egg in it, and for minute parrot bug to feed on it directly. And so you can mix up the habitat so that you have, I remember one planting routine where you'd have do a ring of calendulas around the hill of squash, and then some dill or fennel, coriander that has the flowers. So flowers of the parsley family are really great for hosting the little parasitic wasps. So you can favor those by building some habitat like that, in the immediate area around where you're growing the squash. And then as far as cultural methods, once the vines start running, you just take a shovel of dirt and put it over a section of vine where you've got to know where the joints in the vine are. And the vine will start rooting there. So even if you lose the vine near where it started, where the seed started growing, you can have several places along the length of the vine where you have other roots. So it's a great cultural method there. And then for the squash bugs, you can these are the bugs versus the beetles, right?
The squash bugs are the ones they look kind of like a stink bug, but they're not the primary stink bug we think of. And what happens, you could see the problem with the vine borer, they'll lay their egg basically inside the vine. The squash bugs, at least maybe they're subject to attack because you pull back squash leaf when they start showing, the squash bugs start showing up, and you'll see a little cluster of eggs. And you can mechanically control that. It's just a lot of work to stay on it. You take a piece of like duct tape and put it around your hand so it's double-sided, sticky, and wherever you see those eggs, you just you peel them off and throw them away. But yeah, those friggin' vine borers, man, they get in there. The squash bugs just kind of suck juices out of the leaves, and the plant, if it doesn't get hit too hard, it'll recover. And I've also they like to come out in the evenings and the morning, so I'll go out, and if there's a bunch of nymphs on one leaf, that plant doesn't need that leaf. I'll cut that leaf off and throw it in the freaking incinerator, and there you go. But I have never found anything eats them.
Yeah. So
if you grow like a bunch of catnip, and then right as it starts to flower, when the flowers come on, that kind of really starts attracting them for whatever reason. You put a big ring of cut catnip around it, it's supposed to repel, but I've never tried that.
There's a number of little tiny wasps that feed on the egg stage of different stink bugs and such.
Okay.
And so hosting those, and then the predators like the minute parrot bug, on any kind of flowers, you can grow flower thrips. These little teeny tiny things that when you look at the petals of the flowers, they look kind of burned or trashed or distorted. That's from the feeding of the Western flower thrips. To monitor for them, you just take a piece of white paper underneath some flowers and then tap it, and the thrips fall out onto the paper, and so you can easily see them. Those are fantastic food for the minute parrot bug, which is a really great predator on a bunch of different kinds of eggs. And so just having any kind of flowers out there will give you good habitat for the minute parrot bug. So interplanting with alyssum or some low growing flowering plant that you can grow the flower thrips on.
So like sweet alyssum or something like that, like a sprawling small flower.
Yeah, something's not going to interfere, with the growth of the squash vines, or something that's tall, like the dill, fennel, coriander, cilantro. Yeah. And then there's a seat of the pants biocontrol that you can do. So you can collect some of the adult stink bugs, and then put them into a blender with a drop or two of liquid soap or detergent, and blend them up, and then put them through a screen or sieve, so you can get out the chunky bits, and then put that in a sprayer, and then spray that out onto your plants, and it will repel or make the other insects sick. That there would be different kinds of pathogens and parasites in the blended up bugs, And so you'd be spreading, this into the environment. And there's probably some alarm pheromones and things like that. You kind of notice that when you go into a room of dead people, you don't think about eating,
Yeah. Yeah.
So the wood vinegar is also another thing that, oh no, fire, fire, fire. Everybody runs away. And so you can simulate, like having a fire, in the area by just spraying some of the wood vinegar.
Yeah. Yeah. And I've been talking lately about how there are plants in nature that until they're exposed to smoke, they literally won't produce seed. Like it's a biostimulant as well. And healthy plants are always the first defense, right? Like, there's so many analogies between other blocks of science that have just lost the plot. Like when you think of cancer, like the best thing you can do to help somebody, especially in early stage cancer, strengthen their own immunity.
Yeah.
Your own immunity is your best defense. So like a healthy plant is the best defense against any of these pests. I've heard from some people like Helen Othro that if a plant has a high enough Brix rating, a friggin' pest won't even eat it.
Yeah.
Like they don't want. It's like that's insect food until you make it healthy and it becomes human food. And if insects are eating your plants, you have work to do so that your plants will be healthy enough that insects won't want them.
Yeah,
I think there's something that I don't know if you can take that to the bank on every plant with every pest in every situation, right? Because they got to eat something. But I think there is something to it, and I think there is no doubt if you plant, I don't care what it is, you plant 10 plants in a row that are the same plant. And you look at one and it's just not doing as well as the others. When the pests show up, they will hit that one first. And it'll be every time that it'll get hammered where we want the best looking plant. They kind of want the one that's sickly, Yeah,
Tom Dykstra, Dykstra Labs in Florida, has some really great videos on YouTube. I think it's on the Advancing Eco-Agriculture channel on YouTube about this interaction that as you progress up the Brix level with in a sense, the health of your plant. With very low Brix, you see the aphids, and then with higher Brix, you might see leafhoppers or something like that. And then a little higher Brix level, you'll see caterpillars, and then up around 10, 12 Brix, you'll see grasshoppers, and then 14 Brix, nothing. It's just, and again, it's a principle, but it's not an absolute. And so we've been promoting the idea with some caveats that it's an effect and it's important, but it may not be the total end game, the totality of it. The basic idea is that unhealthy plants produce these partial proteins that are very sweet to the taste of the insect, and as the health of the plant improves, the proteins are complete and whole, and that insects actually can't digest them, so they can eat the plant, but they won't get any nutrition from them, so they're not going to be growing or developing. So it's fascinating the stuff that we're putting together now, and so we can do this. We can grow healthy food in a healthy environment, and grow our culture to one that supports life.
Yeah.
It's going to take all of us working together, all of us doing our part, everybody, wherever you are, there's some piece of soil around you, whether you own it or not, you can take care of it and grow some flowers, throw some mulch down,
and as goes soil health, goes all health, including human health. I mean, if you want to see a sick society, look at a society whose soil is sick, and you will find a sick society. And that's what we have today. We have a sick society in America in a variety of ways, but from a pure disease standpoint and a lifestyle disease standpoint, and it stands to reason. And, people getting taken out by what essentially was a bad cold is an example of that, because if you're nutrient deficient, you're no different than that plant. that pest, that virus, that bacterium, it's going to infect you the same way. On that note, can you tell people, like, if they want to get advice from you, maybe purchase some beneficial insects and stuff like that? And I've got all this stuff in the notes already, but just let people know about it. And if you don't get it written down or something while you're listening, let's just go to the show notes today. Episode 3279 will be on the audio side. If you're watching the video, there's a link down there. That'll go live about an hour after Ron and I will finish up the live stream. And everything that Ron can tell you about, because I went and looked and found everything and stuck them in there, so you'll be able to find all his stuff. But tell him what you've got available to him, Ron.
Oh, quite a bit. Like I said, so we've been doing this as a company for 70 years, so we got quite a body of literature available. So I did put the links for the SPM work group into the private chat. If you can put those in the
I'll add that.
Put it into the group chat or to the notes of the for the podcast.
Yeah.
Our main website is Rincon-Vitova.com. Rincon after the beach, Rincon Beach, Rincon, and then Vitova, contraction of live egg, Vita Ova, from the Latin, VITOVA.com, and then DietrichInstitute.org. That's Dietrich, DIETRICK, Institute.org is our nonprofit through which we do training. And then we developed a whole bunch of material to promote our view of the sustainable pest management process. And those are available at bugfarm.us. So, and then we have an 800 number. It's 800-248-2847. Last four digits spell bugs. So pretty easy to remember. And we're open to discussing pest problems that we're kind of novel as far as businesses go. We want to talk to our customers and we want to talk to people. And this is our mission, to help people get off of these toxic pesticides. So if we can help you control some kind of pest in a wide range of different situations, give us a shout. We'll give you some suggestions. If we can sell something, fine. If not, fine. We're still fulfilling our mission to get people off of these toxic pesticides and grow healthy food in a healthy environment. So again, I appreciate the ability to talk to your crew here and appreciate what you're doing, and keep up the good work. There's a lot that we need to relearn that has been forgotten, or actually, they burned the books on biological control, in the last couple of generations here. We need to reestablish that information, connect to our elders and to the wisdom that they had as far as how to live on the land in harmony.
Well, let's hit a few questions and comments if you can before you go.
Sure. Yeah.
Builder of Castle says, what happens when the toxic chemicals stop working on the industrial farms? What happens when the soil no longer grows food? Well, hopefully we figure it out before we get there, because my answer to that is a lot of people starve.
Well, it's what we're seeing, what we've been seeing for the last, 30, 40 years is the pesticides don't work anymore. So they come up with something new, different, more toxic, that sort of thing. That, the new sledgehammers, to try to beat Mother Nature into submission. So there's a number of pesticides that have got off the market because the insects developed resistance to them, or the diseases they were supposed to control developed resistant to that strategy of trying to kill them. So, to date, we haven't seen any evidence of insects becoming resistant to being eaten.
Yeah.
that, if you're eaten, you're gone,
Yeah, I remember Lawton saying
There's no
that
memory
all the
there.
time. There is no resistance to being eaten by a lacewing.
Yeah.
It doesn't exist because you're dead, because you're eaten, right?
Resistance is futile.
It is futile, right? And like, you got to think about what we're playing around with when we're using chemicals to kill insects, bacterium, etc. So there's like 8 billion people in the world. If you released a virus that was going to kill 98% of humanity would reconstitute into something new. And the 2% that survived and reproduced eventually would go back to having 8 billion people, and they'd be resistant to this thing. But there's 8 billion people in the world, and it's more people than ever existed at any time in the world, as far as we know. There's more people now than all the people that lived from like 1500 up until 100 years ago, right? Okay, that's how long it takes us to reproduce. We go in and we kill an insect that one mother insect makes 1,000 eggs. Even though a very small number survive the chemical warfare we come out with. In 5 generations, it's hundreds of billions on 1,000 acres of that pest that is now completely resistant to that, because their reproductive rate exceeds ours by numbers that the human, people think they know what a billion means. No, you don't. You can't get your head around a billion anything if it's actual real things. So a billion, then there's probably a billion fire ants on my 3 acres. So if I go out there and use a toxin on them that only, 1 out of 1,000 queens survives, I will have a billion super ants in 2 or 3 seasons.
Yeah.
And we just don't think that way. And that's a really scary thought. The other question I have is really the same question in a few different ways from the same person. Want to Learn said he's curious about ideas and certifications for natural pest control business and urban residential customers, like getting rid of roaches from suburbia naturally. And he also says, curious for what would be possible to monetize natural pest management in an urban environment as a side business. And would you need any certifications or anything for something like that?
Right. We used to have a supply of cockroach parasites. These little tiny wasps, excuse me, about 1/10 of an inch long. The mama would lay her egg in the cockroach egg case, or ootheca, technically called. And so we could just hook you up with that fellow, and he would supply you with some, and you could control the roaches that way. So the commercial supply is not there, but the parasites are out there. So first off is to use some products that don't kill the parasites. The borate-based products are very effective and don't interfere with the life cycles of the parasites. So you mix up boric acid, sugar, and maybe some oats or something like that, and put that out in the environment. Or like flour is one of the ingredients. And so you can make a simple cockroach bait. There's a commercial one, magnetic roach food by Stapleton's, I think it is a commercial product. The adult roaches eat it. They go back to their nest in the middle of the walls and poop. And their nymphs, the little tiny cockroaches, eat that poop, and it kind of passes through the critters like that. So there's some roach baits that are very effective, and just in the kitchen area and such, you can just dust around with the powdered boric acid. If you can see it, that's too much on there. We've got a whole HTML page cockroach program on our Rincon-Vitova website. So we did a workshop on how to manage roaches biologically, broad range of things. And we have a CD of that workshop that you need to get up on YouTube. So you can look for, if you have like an institution or something like that, you can look for the cockroach egg cases that are parasitized, and then put those in a sleeve cage and let the little wasps emerge, and then start culturing them. It's very easy to grow cockroaches for food.
Yeah, yeah.
So there's a number of structural pests that we can manage biologically, and generally the borate-based baits for ants and roaches are very effective, extremely low risk. We use boric acid for washing our eyeballs, and it used to be used as a diet aid. So average human adult can take something like an ounce of boric acid and maybe just mess up their guts a little bit for a short period of time, but no lasting effect. And it's safe around kids and dogs and pets and stuff like that. So there's some real simple low risk solutions. In urban pest control, first line of defense is exclusion. You just build your house so there's no open freeways coming in for the pest.
So we'll just do one more, and then I want to let you go. Any ideas to decrease chiggers?
Oh, chiggers! Oh, wonderful stuff.
Yeah.
So chiggers.
When I was a kid, we always just dusted our waistline and our ankle line around with sulfur.
Yeah.
We put it in a sock, tie a knot in it, and you just kind of. It worked really good. Growing up in Florida, I haven't seen a chigger here where I live in Texas, or a roach, thank God, in a very long time. I've never seen a roach here. It's amazing how they are geographically attuned to certain climates. When I grew up as a kid in Jacksonville, Florida, if you said there were no roaches at all in your home, you were just a liar, because they just existed. They just were. We had them palmetto ones that were friggin' the size of a flying mouse too. But chiggers in Florida were a thing, man. In the swamp forests, you go in there without that repellent and you'd have little bumps all over, especially again around your waist and your ankles. Any thoughts on managing them though?
Yeah, let's see if I remember the biology right. They're mites that feed on grain, and one of the genus names is Pymotes, Pymotes, and the sulfur, dusting sulfur, in an area, we got an area with a grassy area around your place or something like that. You can get dusting sulfur for $15 for a 50-pound bag. And you get one of these dusters. There's these gizmos that have a crank on the side and blow out the dust. You want to wear a mask, a tight sealing mask, because that stuff gets in your eyes. It burns. It's acceptable and organic, but I think it's one of the ones that is kind of hazardous as far as the effect on the body, the powdered sulfur. But you can dust the area where you've got the grass, and it will dramatically decrease the itch mites and the chiggers that way. For treating them, we really like there's a product, Zhengu Shui. It's a Chinese liniment that's got camphor and menthol in it that is very effective for reducing the itch. And the camphor and menthol are like vapor repellents of the repellents actually kill the mites. And so it's kind of like a botanical insecticide, and also decreases the itch. So it's something we found very effective here.
And I'll say that what I've got up on the screen right now, if you've never seen chiggers, that's a bad case. I've never seen one that bad, but I've seen it almost that bad, and it is it's a miserable thing. It's like the worst poison ivy you ever had, if you've never experienced the chigger. But I'm always getting rid of them.
We used to grow millions of grain moss on whole grain barley, and so occasionally the culture would get infested with these itch mites, and they would eat the grain moth larvae. It was one we were growing, was Citroga, the grain moth, and when the itch mites got in there, they would eat the larvae and wouldn't get any production. And handling the grain then was hazardous because we'd get, all these itchy spots. So these little mites are actually burrowing in your skin.
Yeah.
That's why it itches so much.
Yeah.
And so the camphor and menthol combo in some of these liniments is most effective surface treatment. I think increasing the biodiversity, especially fungal biodiversity, would help. Like for ticks, there's a fungus that eats the larvae in the soil, so you can spray that around. And then as far as mechanical things for ticks, you can use a tick flag, a piece of like a yard square of light-colored flannel cloth on a stick, and just kind of drag that along in the area. The ticks jump onto it, and they can just pick them up. It dramatically decreases the ticks in the neighborhood.
Well, man, I really enjoyed this discussion with you. Again, I'm going to remind folks that I have all of your resources already in the show notes, except the stuff on the California work group that wasn't in your original app. I've already emailed that to myself from the private chat, so I can't forget before I leave the room to get it like I did the last time a guest used that feature. So I'll add that. And about 1 hour from right now, if you go to the survivalpodcast.com, all of Ron's resources, everything we talked about today will be with the audio notes when the audio side goes out. So
want to encourage everybody to bitch.
Okay.
Tell your elected officials, tell your government bureaucrats, we want healthy food in a healthy environment. Get it done.
Yeah, I agree, man. Again, thank you for being with us today. I appreciate it. And we'll definitely be happy to have you back on, Ron. Thanks for being with us today.
Enjoy your day.
All right, guys, real quick before I completely wrap up, wanted to let you guys know about our item of the day today. As you know, you can always help support this show by doing your online shopping at tspaz.com, TSPAZ. tspaz.com. This is something that I've been promising to bring around for a while. I have my own fertility program that I have been teaching for about 7 years. And one of the keys to it is mycorrhizal inoculum. And mycorrhizal fungi form hyphae in the soil that literally attach to the roots of plants and effectively extend the root system. And this is a beneficial relationship for the fungi and for the plant. They kind of need each other. And the problem had become that there's a lot of this product that's crap. I'll just be honest with you. There's not a lot of oversight. There's not a lot of QC and quality control. And I'd found an excellent product. And then it was discontinued, which happens all the time. And it took me 2 years to find one that I was really comfortable specifically recommending by brand. And it is Dynamco mycorrhizal inoculum. And there's a couple things I like about it. One is just the selection of mycorrhizal fungi that are in it are exceptional. Two is the quantity is huge to the application compared to a lot of other ones. And yes, they have lab results that show this. But the other thing is, if you look at it, it's in those that are on the video, it's in little granules. And those little granules are basically encapsulated so the fungi are protected from exposure. So it has a longer shelf life. And I've trialed quite a few different varieties. This has given me so far the most aggressive root structure in plants. I'm talking, I've got, pepper plants that are 2 inches tall that have 4 true leaves on them. And I'm using 12-ounce red Solo cups like we used to party with in high school with a hole drilled in the bottom for starting plants in this year. And that little pepper's got roots that have completely filled the entire cup. I give a lot of information on this. It is now my official recommendation within my fertility program. I would definitely recommend that you consider using this stuff. One thing you need to know about mycorrhizal fungi, scale. And basically, it doesn't move. And it needs to be in contact with plant roots to do its thing and to start growing. So you need to apply it right at the root zone, not on the surface, not later on when the plant is as young as possible. So it forms a symbiotic relationship with the fungi as early as possible. The write-up will give you a lot of information about that. But remember, no matter what you buy, if you start your shopping at tspaz.com, you help us out no matter what it is that you eventually buy. Also consider becoming a member of the Member Support Brigade or value for value support. You can do that on Nostr. My pub key is in the video notes below. It's in the audio notes for every show that I've done for the last 3 weeks since I got on Nostr. Or you can, support us through value for value through a podcasting 2.0 app like fountain.fm. And as always, the best way to really support this show and the best return of investment on you guys is become a member of the Member Support Brigade. You do that, you get a bunch of discounts. You use your discounts, you get your money back, and you get more money than you spend back. So even if you hate me, you should join anyway because you'd be buying stuff that you're going to buy anyway and getting your money back on it. And if you do like the show, it's a great way to make sure that we're around for another 15 years. Yes, it is going to be 15 years this summer of the Survival Podcast. I've been talking to my wife. We're trying to figure out how we're going to do a 15-year anniversary party, kind of like we did for 10. But if you want us for another 15 years, make sure you're supporting the show. 30 years as a podcast. That could be a hell of a run. I think we're going to get there someday. With that, it's been Jack Spirko with another edition of the Survival Podcast.